This is the Egg Sucking Leech. I've got a size 10 long hook in my vise, and we've got a hot orange bead on the front. I'm going to take 8 or 9 wraps of 0.020 lead, and then we're just going to go ahead and break this off. And then I'm going to just push that right up into the bead, making sure those coils are kind of in place. I'm just going to use a black, this is GSP, but just a black thread. Just happened to be what I had handy. I'm going to get that started here on the shank of the hook, laying a thread base part of the way down. And I'll just bring that back up to behind the lead. We'll cut off the excess. And then I'm just going to go ahead and bring this thread up through that lead. So, from my perspective, the leech is probably underrated. Maybe. It's a really go-to pattern for me. I've done some of the best fishing that I've ever done using a leech. And when I tie them, if I don't have the bead on the front, which often I don't, the Egg Sucking Leech is going to have the orange bead on the front. But I always put lead here at the front. That way when I'm stripping the leech or the fly in, it'll have that up and down undulation like a leech would have. It's a great stillwater pattern. I've used it on lakes and reservoirs and just done exceptionally well. It's always my go-to. So I'm going to cover up the lead just a little bit. It's going to be covered up by nice dubbing, so I'm not overly worried about it, but I don't like to have that dubbing kind of spread out and then have the gray lead showing through. So I will take a few wraps here just to get that covered up a little bit better. And once I've got that pretty well covered up, we're just going to go ahead and continue our thread down to the bend of the hook. Making sure I get it all the way back down there. Probably not all that important. It's going to be covered up by a nice marabou tail. I'm going to bring this back up to right behind those lead wraps. So in this variation, it's going to be a black with a little hint of red in it. So I'm just going to take a black marabou feather and kind of stroke it back. I want the tail here to be about the length of the shank of the hook, so I'm going to take my measure just about there. I'm going to transfer that measurement back to the bend of the hook. We'll take a couple of wraps to secure that in place right up here behind those lead wraps. And once I have a couple of wraps in place, I'm just going to come on in with my scissors. I'll go ahead and cut that balance off pretty close. Trying not to build up too much bulk here. I'll just go ahead and clean that up. And with this one, like I said, I do like a little hint of red in it, so I'm actually going to take a red marabou feather as well. I'm going to sandwich it between a couple of pieces of black marabou, so I want that to be the same length. So we'll go ahead and stroke that back, take that as our measure. Take a wrap or two here and check that length. That's looking just fine. So I'll go ahead and take a couple more wraps back on it to secure it in place as well. And cut off that excess. And then clean up those butt ends. Now I'm just going to take a small little clump more of the black. We're going to have that the same length as well, so I'm going to hold that in place. a few wraps back on it to secure it. I'm going to grab my scissors. So we end up with kind of a sandwiched with red in the middle. And I'm going to clean up those ends as well. And from here I'm going to kind of pull up on everything just to make sure it's above and stays on top of the center of the hook. And I'm going to start wrapping backwards. Back to the bend where we're going to start a dubbing loop. That's going to do me just fine. I'll take another pass slip through that just to get some of that to lay down. Then we'll just go right back to the bend of the hook. Extend my thread out, and I'm just going to use a little hook here, shepherd's hook, and we'll create a dubbing loop. Let's toss our thread over the top. I'll take a couple of spins around the base of that. I can pull that and tie it back to right at the base of the tail. So when I create my little dubbing rope here, it's going to start right at the base of the tail. I'm going to bring my thread back up, and we're actually going to leave it right behind the bead. So for my dubbing here, I'm actually using mohair, and I've taken some red flash and put it in a coffee grinder, which is a great way of making dubbing, but it gives us a nice black mohair dubbing with some red flash in it. So we're just going to open up our dubbing loop. I'm going to set this hefty cloud of mohair and red flash dubbing in it. Then we're just going to spin it. I'm going to spin it pretty tight, so it's going to take me a second. And once I've got that spun up, I've got my bobbin on the bobbin cradle, so it's out of my way. I want to make sure I get these first couple of wraps right at the base of the tail. And then I'm going to just try to take touching wraps, just right, moving right up the shank of the hook here. So now I'm out of my dubbing loop. Go ahead and move the cradle out of the way, and we'll take a couple of wraps right over the top of our dubbing loop to lock it in place. Then I'll pull it back towards the bend of the hook, and I'll take a couple of wraps right behind the bead. Because I made it so short, I'm just going to keep it in my hook while I come in with my scissors and cut off the balance. From here I'm going to just kind of stroke some of the stuff backwards and take some wraps back on it just a little bit. Give myself a little bit of extra thread. We'll grab our whip finisher. We're just going to whip finish this right behind the bead. I'm actually going to put in 2 whip finishes just to make sure I've got it nice and secure. Pull it nice and tight just to make sure I've got it tight. And then we'll go ahead and we'll clip off the balance with our thread cutter. From here I'm just going to grab a dubbing brush and I'm going to brush some of that out. That's one of the nice things about mohair. You can really brush it out. It's going to start blending in a little bit with that tail. Keeping in mind that when this is going through the water, all of this is going to suck back and it's going to look just like a leech with a little bit of flash. With that, there you go. The egg sucking leech with a little bit of variety in it, with a peppered red tail and some red flash in our black mohair. It's a great pattern. You will catch fish with this, I can guarantee it. Grab yourself a hook, throw it in your vise, and give this one a shot.